All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next lecture, our first lecture where we actually get to talk about biology itself. So we're going to talk about what is biology today, define what it studies, the key characteristics of living things, as well as the organization of life across different levels. So as usual, here are some links for you to jump to different parts of the presentation. Please use these for easy reference. First of all, let's talk about biology. What is biology? So biology is two components. It's the Greek root for bio, life, meaning life, ology, meaning the study of. It's the study of life. So we study more specifically in biology how different biological systems interact, living systems. We'll get into that a bit more. How these systems are structured and how they function and how those structure and function are interrelated, how information is transferred among and within living things, the role of energy as part of all of this, and how populations change over time. So those are some of the main themes that we'll get into in this presentation. So biology has a lot of different subdisciplines or disciplines that incorporate biology, either within that broader umbrella, but also sharing components with other fields such as ecology and bioengineering, biotech, especially, are a couple of those that are a little bit more interdisciplinary, where we're not strictly doing biological systems, but we have all sorts of related fields, such as paleontology, biogeography, microbiology, cell biology, molecular biology, genetics, physiology, anatomy, botany, zoology, ecology, biotech. It's all biology. If it deals with living things, it's related to biology. So, real quick, just check your notes, pause the video if you'd like. Make sure you can define biology and be able to list a few different examples of subdisciplines or related disciplines, disciplines related to biology, that is, and what they cover. I just realized I didn't really say anything about what some of these other ones cover. Of course, you have the study of animals, the study of plants, that's zoology and botany. You have studies of the structure and function of organisms, of our systems within organisms, our anatomy and our physiology. We have the transfer of information in fields like genetics, microbiology, studying little things, biogeography, studying the big things, like I am a bit of a biogeographer as an ecologist. Paleontology, studying living things that lived a while ago. Biotech, biotech and bioengineering, studying the more technological, human-engineered aspects of biology. Cell biology is related to microbiology, but about how the individual cells and groups of cells structure and function. Molecular biology being the finest scale, looking at the chemicals within our cells. So, moving on. So, a little bit on what those cover. Encourage you to look into them yourself a little bit later. But across all these subdisciplines, there's really a certain number of themes that they all deal with to more or less degree. So all biological systems deal with interactions. They interact with each other. No living thing, big or small, is independent from other living things. They're interdependent of each other. Another common theme is that structure and function are interrelated. When you have a diversity of structures, you tend to have a diversity of functions. Specific structures have very specific functions. So in anatomy, like how things are shaped, has to do with their function, and same goes for ecosystems and environments. Is how those ecosystems are structured, how the components interact, going back to the first theme, that helps determine what their function is. Not that it's a deterministic thing. Third is that information has to be transferred in all of this. And most often here, what we're talking about is genetic information, because genes are the information of life. That is the language in which our information is coded in all living things, is in DNA and RNA. So organisms need to be able to pass these on to one another, and within them, between their cells and the replication. And yeah. And then, of course, at broader scales, you have whole organisms needing to be able to communicate with one another in order for them to work together and for them to respond to their environment. The fourth is this theme of energy. So life depends on continuous inputs and transfer of energy. So energy is a physical property that can't be created or destroyed. The energy that living things use has to come from somewhere, and it has to go somewhere. And even though some of it may be sort of lost from these organisms as you move up a food chain, typically we depict this flow, the linear flow of these along a single chain, a food chain. If it starts to get more complicated, then those are food webs. But although some energy is lost from these food chains in the form of heat, in fact, there's about a 90% loss. Only 10% of the energy is retained within each level here. That flow of energy is part of what makes it possible, makes the structure, the multi-level structure of ecosystems possible. And also at smaller scales. Sorry, I'm consistently ecology biased because of my expertise. To continue that a little bit more, we use energy as one of the ways in which we like to classify different types of organisms. So we often classify organisms based on how they acquire their energy. So autotrophs get that energy not from other living things. So they gain that energy through chemical reactions in response to the abiotic non-living environment. So photosynthesis is getting that energy from the sun, from light, whereas chemosynthesis is taking advantage of chemical reactions to trap energy. All of autotrophs are trapping energy from their surroundings, whether it's the chemical energy of their surroundings or the energy from light. Heterotrophs are those that gain energy from eating other living things. Hetero meaning other or different. So troph, I should say, just means eating. Food, it's food related consumption. So they consume other things. They consume different things other than themselves. Decomposers are essentially heterotrophs, but they're eating once living things that are now dead. They're just dead organic matter, and they're breaking that down into other forms of energy, undoing the work that the heterotrophs did. And a detritivore is sort of another step below that, I would say, where it might not even be eating whole organisms. It might be eating more broken down bits of organic matter. So detritivore decomposers, not decomposters. There's a number of typos in these slides. Apologies. So yeah, decomposers and detritivores, similar, related concepts. This is already clicked in, but if you were already on to the next slide and answered this question yourself, which of the following organisms are heterotrophs? You'll see that ticks, lions, mouses, humans are all heterotrophs. All animals are heterotrophs. We all eat other living things, whereas all plants, or most plants, I should say, are entirely autotrophic. They photosynthesize, typically. Plants and algae We'll get into that distinction later. And then the last of our themes that we need to discuss here is that populations change over time. Population being a group of organisms, um, organisms of the same species that are interacting and interbreeding with one another specifically. But the characteristics of a population change in a number of different ways over time. This is just a fact of life, where the number of individuals in a population will change, the genetic composition of those individuals will change, of this whole population. Individuals don't really change in their genetic composition much over the course of their life, but as there's variation within the population through processes such as natural selection, mainly natural selection, but also some random processes like genetic drift, there are changes that go on where certain genes will change in their frequency over time, sometimes in a non-random, selective way, sometimes in a more random way, through processes like genetic drift, bottleneck effects, and things we'll talk about a little bit more later in Gen Bio when we get into evolution and ecology. And new species come from those existing populations. So a new species arise when a variability that already exists within a population becomes selected for. That is to say, it becomes advantageous, and gradually, as that population over time, as new individuals die and new individuals are born, those genes that will eventually become a new species become more frequent. I'm trying to find my cursor here. So we have our 5 themes of biology that we just talked about. Those are sort of, again, those are the themes that are across all of the different disciplines dealing with living, the study of living things. Some deal with some of those themes more than others, but we want to make sure that we get those core concepts as sort of the general truisms and patterns in biology. Now, moving on to what is life. The thing is, we've gone through all this. We haven't actually said what is life. What is a living thing? So living things, it's hard to say that there's one characteristic that defines life. But what we can say is that there are all these several characteristics. These are some pretty widely agreed upon characteristics that all things that we consider living have. So they have order, there's some sort of ordered structure to them, and patterns. Life responds to its environment in different ways. Plants, for instance, respond by growing in particular ways, whereas animals, we tend to respond by moving and interacting with the environment in different ways. Life is self-reproductive. It reproduces. You have some life, then you end up with more life. Individuals get replaced. It adapts. This kind of goes along with the response to the environment in number 2, but adaptation in this case means there are changes in those genes, changes in the genetic composition of a population. There's some longer-term response of not just individuals to their environment, but populations over time respond to the environment. It grows and it develops. That structure sort of changes as it gets larger, restructures itself. There's development. There's some maintenance of homeostasis, which is to say there are mechanisms that allow a living organism to maintain a balance of internal conditions that is separate from its surroundings. Um, Life processes a lot of energy. So the consumption and the transformation of energy is something that living things do really well and is one of the most impressive things, because to go along with that order, it takes a lot of energy in order to build up structure, to build order. You need energy to fuse molecules together and to fuse those molecules into, living structures that we'll talk about: organelles, cells, whole organisms, bodies, etc. And lastly, there's evolution. Life changes over time. This is Evolution itself is not really a debatable thing. This is just something that evolution does. Evolution is not the same thing as natural selection, as we'll talk about more in the future. But yeah, life changes. It's one of the most consistent things in life is change. And in talking about life, we often depict that we think of it as occurring at these different scales of organization, of biological organization. So we at the smallest scale, both spatially, so small spaces, small times, spatially and temporally, we have our matter in the form of atoms. Those make up molecules. Those make up organelles. Multiple organelles structured into a cell. That is what we would generally consider the smallest unit of life. So organelles themselves are not life in themselves, but then cells make up tissues, which make up organs, which make up organ systems, which make up organisms. Multiple organisms of the same type, of the same species, are generally considered a population. When you have multiple types of organisms, multiple species, you have a community. In that community, if you incorporate some of the non-living abiotic components of your environment, then that's when you have an ecosystem, such as the Sonoran Desert is made up of all sorts of plants and animals and bacteria and soil and rocks and rain, whatever, all the non-living things as well. And when you have multiple different ecosystems of a similar type that are maybe they have a similar climate, like all the different deserts of the world, then that is what you consider a biome. So again, we're getting bigger, 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 bigger. And then if you have all the biomes, all the different types of ecosystems in the different climates grouped together, all the living things, that is our biosphere, which is all of the parts of the world that support life. Again, this is all the structures and functions and the processes and the patterns, across these numbers. This is going from really small, faster moving things to larger, slower moving things. Not that things can't change very fast at the biosphere level, at the biome level, and things can't be really slow at the atom and cell level, but just in general. We have our scales, our levels of organization. So if we were in a in-person class, we would make this a little bit more of a discussion, but I want us to think about why is life made of cells? What's the purpose of having a cell? Why keep all your things in a little bundle like that? You don't need cells to have chemical reactions, because chemical reactions do occur in non-living things. We could think of some examples of non-living chemical reactions, such as, I don't know, the rain hitting a rock and starting to dissolve some of the minerals in it, and then those minerals can walk away. Really, anything that's dissolving in something else, that's a chemical reaction in a non-living thing. There are some of these reactions that may even seem pretty lifelike. They might even be self-replicating. They might have movement and respond to their environment conditions. I think one of the cool examples here is something called fire. Certainly something that can self-replicate, it can spread, it can reproduce, it changes, it responds to the environment. But it's lacking certain things that life does, like it doesn't have an ordered structure to it. Yeah, so I think that's a good example there. I don't know if you could think of any others. Let me know. I'd love to hear your examples. Maybe throw those in the discussion in the Learn section um, for our assignment. Now, and then there are also those things that humans may even refer to as living, but don't meet all those criteria. We're thinking specifically viruses are probably a good example here of not really quite meeting all of the characteristics of a living organism, but in that it's not made up of cells. So, you could think about which of those characteristics, if I could make our way back here, as a reminder, which of these characteristics that things like fire or viruses aren't really have. Certainly they have a lot of these. One thing that is important to consider here with viruses, for instance, is this regulation or homeostasis. There's not really as much of a process to maintain them, maintain themselves and their structures. Also, the energy processing is a very key characteristic of life that I don't believe viruses, it said, have a significant level of doing that. So then also make sure you have a sense of what those levels are. Again, starting at cell, because the molecules and stuff, we'll talk about some chemistry in the coming weeks, but the cell is our basic unit, our smallest unit of what we consider life. It's made up of organelles, which are life adjacent. You have our cells, then our tissues, our organs, our organ systems, our organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems. Did I skip one there? No, I didn't. Ecosystems, biomes, biosphere. All right, and let's finish here in talking about cells. So let's talk about that smallest unit of life itself. So cells are enclosed by a membrane of what's important about that is what is key to consider about that is it allows there to be internal and external chemical reactions. You have an in and an out. That is sort of what enables there to be a unique composition and a unique environment within them. By having this membrane, you can have an enclosed environment with very specific conditions that you maintain. Cell membranes allow for selective transfer of certain chemicals, so things can be let in and let out in a way that enables a cell to maintain its characteristics that make it considered life. Its ability to maintain order and homeostasis. You can't really have homeostasis or regulation if you don't have a means of separating, at least partially separating yourself from your exterior environment. Cells come in two main varieties. So we have our prokaryotic cells and our eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are typical of unicellular organisms. So a whole organism is just a single cell. So Prokaryotes sort of break the hierarchy that we talked about of cells, tissues. There's no tissues, there's no organs, no organ systems here. It's just an organism is a single cell. Occasionally, they do get clumped together in colonies. Not occasionally, pretty commonly, but more by definition, they're the unicellular organisms. They don't have any organelles, so they don't have any membrane-bound units within them. So organelles are just these smaller membrane-bound structures that don't really have all the characteristics of a cell itself, in that they lack a nucleus, and they lack, many of those organelles don't do all the things like processing energy that a cell does. But prokaryotes don't have organelles. They don't even have a nucleus, which is a particular type of organelle that separates the genetic material. Whereas a eukaryotic cell, first of all, these are most multicellular organisms, most eukaryotic cells make up multicellular organisms, but there are also unicellular eukaryotes like ourselves and colonial eukaryotes. They do have membrane-bound organelles. They do have a nucleus where they can separate their genetic material from the rest of the interior of the cell. So what you can think of here is that a eukaryote is defined by having sort of like multiple layers of different unique environments. By having these multiple these organelles within them, you have further more control over the specific environments that you have for specific chemical reactions to occur, rather than them just mostly occurring within the general soupiness of a eukaryotic cell, where those interactions are just occurring within the cytoplasm, within the semi-fluid of that is inside of a cell. So eukaryotes have organelles. They have these other structures inside of them made up of membranes that allow them to do different functions. Again, because structure is interrelated to function. So we're going to pick between we're going to test ourselves here. We're going to pick between a few different organisms, whether we think it has prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells, based on what we know about them. So we have these small rod or spherical shaped organisms. They don't have organelles. They're also individual cells, it looks like. So that would be a prokaryote. A zebra, or a zebra, which is probably technically more correct. Do we think this is a eukaryote or a prokaryote? Well, we know that zebras are made up of multiple cells, right? Because they're just like us. They're other mammals. They have tissues. They have organs. They have organ systems. They're part of these ecosystems. Oh, it took me away. But yes, they are eukaryotes. And what do you think about this? This is actually a bit of a tricky one, I would say, because you have small unicellular organisms that form these colonies in volcanic hot springs. Now, this could actually be, that sounds a lot like prokaryotes, but there are also some unicellular eukaryotes that form colonies that could fit into that category, but let's go with prokaryotes. That's probably the better guess. Oh, kelp. Do you think kelp have multiple cells? Do you think they have maybe organelles that help them to absorb the sun's light and photosynthesize? Chloroplasts? Yeah, these are eukaryotes. So I've tested us here, and yeah, hopefully if you did that a bit yourself, you got the right answer. You can always start over if you want. So again, another checkpoint. Make sure you know the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. The first bullet points there were sort of just general patterns, the unicellular versus multicellular thing. But what defines them really is the presence of organelles or not. That is the most common difference in their definition. And to finish up here today, we're going to talk about how we commonly classify life. So, we as biologists find it very useful to be able to talk about how different organisms are related to one another to greater or lesser degrees. So we humans love to classify things and put them into groups and have been doing this for a while, but our main system for doing this in biology goes back to Carl Linnaeus, who, problematic figure as he was, we won't get into that, sort of laid the groundwork for the system that we continue to use today, which is at its broadest level to classify groups of life into a few different domains first. So we have our bacteria, archaea, and our eukaryota. And some of these kingdoms, protists are not really an established kingdom anymore. We will set that aside for a second. Furthermore, there are other things that are somewhat dated about this, how we have this portrayed here, because it turns out our archaea are a fascinating group of organisms. They live in some of the most extreme environments, really hot, really acidic, really cold environments. They most recently are grouped in as being more related to us eukaryotic organisms, us animals, plants, than they are to the bacteria themselves. They used to be considered prokaryotes, but now they're more commonly considered adjacent to the eukaryotes in the sort of tree of life. And so beyond that largest division, beyond the domains of life, that's our biggest sort of split from the common ancestor of all life. We have those main three branches, with the archaeans being closer to us on the branch, closer to us on the tree than the bacteria are. And then we break the whole idea of Linnaean taxonomy is to break this down into further and further levels. You may have heard of some of these levels be used before. So we have the domain. Within the domain, there are multiple kingdoms. Each domain, there are phyla, phylum being the plural of phylum, broken down into more specific classes, orders, families, genera, plural for genus, and species, the subtype of organisms. Of course, in between all of these, as taxonomy has gotten a lot more complicated and our methods of sort of grouping species and looking at their relatedness has evolved, it gets a little bit more complicated, where you have superclasses, subclasses, superorders, infraorders, suborders, lots of different sort of levels within here. But ideally, we put these to where they're an individual clade or an individual branch of that tree and not incorporating multiple branches, which is what we call paraphyletic later on. So this is where we would end. I'm not sure if I'm going to share this Kahoot with you all yet, but we'll work on this in class, perhaps, and maybe I'll update these slides, send you some updates so you can get some practice working with some of these definitions and some of these systems for classification. But I'll leave you with the level of taxonomy, the different taxonomic levels here, and yeah, hope to talk to you later a little bit more about how realistic we think these classes are. And I will see you all in person for the lab. Thanks for listening.